What's up, my fellow small business supporters?
What's up?
I'm Savvy, and welcome back to Savvy Writes Books, the channel where we talk about books and business, where today we have yet another positive book review for you guys. I'll say mostly positive book review because, you know, not everything's perfect. We have a few criticisms here and there. But overall, I wanted to talk about a book that I read throughout the month of November that I would recommend to you guys, and that is a book I'd been meaning to read for a while, and I'm so glad that I finally read, and that is, of course, Stephen King's one and only nonfiction book, On Writing.
Get you some nuts.
There was lots of memes.
Makes me wonder if I should pick up lesbianism.
Chicago. You guys asked for it.
Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel, or if you're new, welcome for the first time. This is Savvy Writes Books, the channel where we talk about books and business, and if you're new here, please don't forget to take a minute and subscribe, because multiple times a week I put out new videos all about books and business, and I wouldn't want you guys to miss those. I am going to be taking a couple weeks off towards the second half of December just to spend some time with family and friends for the holidays and, you know, get some extra rest and things like that, and also plan some bigger videos and some more in-depth things.
Is it getting bigger?
For the new year, for the start of 2023. So we will be doing that as well.
Sometimes it gets bigger.
Now, if you remember, I recently did a review of the book Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell, and then before that I did reviews of other books including Cultish and Word Slut by Amanda Montell, and obviously the big one, I'm Glad My Mom Died by Jeanette McCurdy, which a lot of you guys have seen that video at this point. But what those books all have in common is that they are books that we read for the Your Morning Guru book club.
You do not talk about club.
Oh, actually, I have the mug right here. Here's the Your Morning Guru mug. I've been drinking my coffee out of this today. But if you don't know, I do have a second channel called Your Morning Guru, which is my morning live streaming channel where every morning at 7 a.m. Central Time, my best friend and I host a live stream show together to get people up in the morning. We talk about the day's news. We talk about challenges that we're doing and trying to just do, you know, general fitness, writing goals, self-improvement, and all those kinds of areas and things like that.
Section, option or obsession.
And one of the things that we added at the start of 2022 for that show was a book club. So every month we have a new book that we all read together, and anyone who is in our chat is welcome to come on the show and talk about their thoughts on the book at the end of the month. And we all have a big book club discussion together. It's very interactive and it's a lot of fun. So if this review is something that interests you, then consider watching and consider participating in our next book club read.
Participate? How?
We decided for November to read the book On Writing by Stephen King for a couple reasons. The main one being that November is the month of NaNoWriMo, or National Novel Writing Month, and a lot of people in that community were participating in NaNoWriMo and were working on writing their own novels. I've done a couple videos on this channel at this point about the projects I've been working on during NaNoWriMo. I didn't complete the 50,000 words challenge this year. There was just too much going on, but I did actually get a lot done for NaNoWriMo, and I got a lot written, so that was really nice.
Nice.
And I thought that this book was definitely something that was relevant and helpful to a lot of those writing challenges that we were doing at the time. The premise behind On Writing is that it's a kind of memoir and self-help book mix where Stephen King takes you through his journey of his life as a writer, where he first found his love for writing as a kid, his process of getting his first few books written and published.
This is a process. It's a process.
What that whole thing was like, what it was like to, you know, finally be successful in the world as a writer, how he managed all of that, and then towards the second half of the book, he starts to give some writing advice out to the reader based on what he's learned in his time working as a full-time writer. I have talked in the past when I've reviewed various nonfiction books on this channel how I like when books kind of mix the memoir and self-help stuff together, because a lot of times I've criticized a lot of self-help books on this channel, and a lot of times a big problem I have with self-help books is that they tend to go one way or the other. They're either so vague to the point that I don't learn anything from them, like the writer wants to appeal to the broadest audience possible. They want their advice to be applicable to everyone. They want everyone to be able to learn something from this book. We all remember Dave Hollis's Pancake Gate thing where he was like, everyone needs this book. Everyone will have their life changed by this book. Well, that's not possible. Every book has a target audience. Every book has an ideal reader, as Stephen King calls them, and we'll kind of get into that in a second. But this is all to say that I really do think a lot of self-help books fall into this struggle of trying to make the advice applicable to everyone, and as a result, no one learns anything super new or super tangible from it because it's just the same stuff you've heard over and over again. And then on the other side, you sometimes have people that get too specific with their advice.
TMI, my friend.
To the point where it doesn't apply to you or your situation at all. And that's why I found that the memoir approach, a memoir with like bits of advice woven in, or morals to the stories of your life and things like that, kind of when I talked about Dave Grohl's book when I reviewed that last year around this time, I think that those books tend to be the things that we often learn a lot more from because, like I've said before, I'd much rather read hundreds of nonfiction books written by different people where they just talk about their personal experiences and the specific things they went through, and I take the pieces that work for me and then read another book to learn something else, rather than to read one book that's trying too hard to appeal to everybody. And that's why I do like that mix of memoir and advice, because it does have a lot of writing advice in it. He does give you a lot of tips based on his process, but he also talks about how he developed those processes, the things that he tried, the journey he went through. Now, this book was originally published in 2000, so it kind of follows his journey up until the year 2000 and things like that. And I will say there definitely were a few things in this book that felt dated. So let's talk about those real quick. First of all, one of the things was that this book really focuses on a writing market that was much more prevalent in decades past before the advent of the internet. So keep in mind this book came out in 2000, and while the version that I read and the version that a lot of people in our book club discussion had read was the version that was updated in 2018 with interviews with his kids and like an interview with one of his sons, Joe Hill, I believe, and then also an essay written by Owen King, one of his other sons. And it did have those updates, which was nice, but the text of the book itself still felt about 20 years out of date as it is. We got to keep in mind that the writing and publishing market has evolved rapidly over the past 2 decades, especially because the whole internet boom, right? Like if we look at the ways that technology in particular has evolved in just since the year 2000, just since the turn of the century, it's a completely different world that we're living in right now. This book came out before e-readers were a big thing. This book came out before reading things on the internet and like giant fan fiction archives were as big as they are now and things like that. This book came out long before we had these rapid releases on Amazon and people trying to write for algorithms. It was just a different world at the time. And a lot of the writing advice does talk about things including like, you know, building up a resume and getting a lot of short stories published in literary magazines or even like men's magazines like Playboy and things like that, which is not really a thing you can do anymore. And that's not to say that no literary magazines exist. There are plenty of literary magazines that exist. I've had my work published in multiple kinds of magazines, including news magazines and literary magazines. So like they still exist, but I don't think that they carry the weight or the payment that they used to, because a lot of them are more fringe things or like, I don't know, hipster kind of things, I guess, at this point, as opposed to a regular part of mainstream literary circles. A lot of people focus a lot more on novels now, and a lot of people do still write short stories, but often will release them, you know, maybe as a box set of short stories that you might release as a series of ebooks and put together into one ebook file and sell for a bundle price on Kindle or things like that. And that's not to say that's the only way to do that, but just that none of those options even existed back when this book was first written. So a lot of the advice about the writing market, the publishing market, and things like that is pretty outdated, but it was true to his experience, so I'm still glad to have read about it and to learn about that. This book is where the quote, "The road to hell is paved with adverbs" came from. I'd heard that quote before, and I didn't know exactly where it was from. It was from this book. I feel kind of stupid for not knowing it was from this book, because I'm sure someone has told me that before. But I was listening to this book on an airplane when I was flying to go visit some family, and I was like, he was all of a sudden just like, "The road to hell is paved with adverbs." And I'm like, that's where that comes from. And I kind of like, see, here's the thing. I have mixed feelings on, you know, writing rules that are too prescriptive like that. And I say mixed feelings because I know that Stephen King himself has mixed feelings on it as well. He does talk in the book about how that doesn't mean he avoids adverbs at all costs. It's not to say that adverbs are like a part of speech you need to absolutely avoid, but it is to say that you don't want to rely on adverbs. You don't want to overuse them in place of using a more active verb. So, for example, if you're using adverbs in your dialogue tags, like,
"I'm angry," she said angrily.
Like, is there something better and more descriptive you could use there rather than, like, said angrily, screamed, shouted, just some other type of verb or some other type of description surrounding the sensory experience that comes with that dialogue, as opposed to just throwing an adverb in there and calling it a day?
Nerd.
I I agree that we can become over-reliant on them sometimes, but in the past I was always someone who was like, there is nothing wrong with adverbs, I love my adverbs. And you know, I still do use some adverbs, but it is good to be cognizant of any type of thing that you tend to overuse or any type of writing device that you rely on more than anything else, so that you can go back and say, hey, am I relying on this too much? Do I need to maybe cut some of this down? I thought it was really interesting to learn how Stephen King is a writer who writes without an outline. I didn't know that about him.
I did not know that.
And he has put out a lot of books. I know one of the biggest criticisms he gets is that his books' endings do feel abrupt sometimes, and they kind of seem like, whoa, where did that ending come from? Or did he just not know how to wrap this up? And in a lot of cases that might be true because he writes without an outline. However, I think writing without an outline can be fun too. I'm still trying out different methods. For some books I write with an outline, for some books I write without an outline. I'm a little bit all over the place when it comes to that. For this series I'm working on right now that I was working on during NaNoWriMo, the Boss Babe series, I'm outlining roughly, but not outlining, you know, beat by beat. Whereas, you know, when I've written, like when I write with RK and we write Cancel Sean Boston and that whole series, we do outline that chapter by chapter because we're writing together and it's easier to play off of each other that way. Now I have my book one, Final Vinyl, which I wrote completely without an outline. I just started free writing and went with that and did lots and lots of free writing exercises and then tried to figure out where it all fit together. So that book was a complete, like, pantser type of thing, I guess. So that's more along the lines of what Stephen King does. Anyway, I just thought it was cool to learn that and to learn about his process. Another thing in the book that I thought was dated that just bothered me, we'll just talk real quick about a couple things that bothered me, because I know you guys love it when I complain. So, first thing that bothered me was, so the book's kind of in two halves. The first half is kind of like pure memoir stuff. It's just him telling stories about his life, and it does include his stories of how he got into writing, how he first started publishing, and things like that. And then the second half of the book is writing advice, which is then woven in with more stories of throughout his life and his own processes. I did think the structure there could have been a little bit smoother, and it could have all been woven together from the beginning.
So smooth.
Oh, incredibly smooth.
But I don't really care that much about that. The thing that bothers me is when it started the second section, when he first started the section about writing advice. Here's how it opens. There are no bad dogs, according to the title of a popular training manual. But don't tell that to the parent of a child mauled by a pit bull or Rottweiler. He or she is apt to bust your beak for you. I'm apt to bust the beak of anyone who shit talks pit bulls. I'm one of those cringe pit bull mommies. I'm over here like, I am a pit bull mommy. I take pride in that. I'm gonna grow up into one of those quirky old wine ants who puts pit bull mommy stickers on her, not my car. I don't ever intend to own a car. I'm too quirky for a car. Maybe I'll put it on my bicycle or something. Anyway, my point is, I really get annoyed when people shit talk dog breeds. And I know that this was the point that he was getting at, was like, oh, well, a lot of people say that there are no bad dogs, but you don't want to tell that to someone who was just mauled by a pit bull. If someone was mauled by a pit bull and they're using that as an excuse to try to discriminate against all pit bulls, yeah, I'm gonna bust their beaks, Stephen. The reason that he started the chapter off like this was then it became an analogy, and he said, and no matter how much I want to encourage the man or woman trying for the first time to write seriously, I can't lie and say there are no bad writers. Sorry, but there are lots of bad writers. Some are on staff at your local newspaper, usually reviewing little theater productions or pontificating about the local sports teams. So I get what he's saying, which is that, like, yeah, you can say that there are no bad writers, but in reality, a lot of people aren't very good at writing, and you need to practice and hone your skill like anything else. But did you really have to throw my baby boy Chewie under the bus for that?
You're my boy, Blue!
Like, Chewie's very disappointed in you, Steven. You don't want Chewie to be disappointed in you, not because he's gonna maul you, like you might be thinking, but because you just don't want to make his little face sad. I think Stephen King needs to read one of my books. Stephen, I read one of your books, now you read one of my books. When I say I read one, I've read a lot of Stephen King's books, but I mean, I'm reviewing one of your books right now. I've reviewed Stephen King before on this channel too. I should link one of those up in the cards. Anyway, Stephen, I'm talking about your book right now. You read my book in return. My book is called Smile Chewie. It is a picture book for children about how we shouldn't discriminate against pit bulls. If you see this video, let me know where to mail it to, and we'll get that all worked out. Maybe I'll mail it to him just for fun. Maybe I'll, like, find his, like, P.O. box. Because that wouldn't be, it's not weird if you find someone's P.O. box, like they have that so the public can mail them stuff, right? Guys, let me know in the comments below. Should I mail Stephen King a copy of Smile Chewy? Let me know in the comments below. There was one other thing I didn't really like about this book, and that was the putting down of film and television a lot. And it didn't even really make sense within the context of the story. I know that, especially like when I was growing up in the 90s, which was during the time that this book was being written in the first place, when I was growing up in the 90s, there was always this stuff about like, TV's rotting your brain, go read a book. But then in the past, like people used to say like, books are trash and are rotting your brain, go play outside and get strong. Or it would be going outside is rotting your brain because you're not getting any mental exercise. Sit down and read a book.
Did your brain work? Actually,
my point is people can put down anything in favor of anything else, but I always grew up hearing, TV and movies rots your brain, sit down and read a book. However, it was actually through studying film and through studying screenwriting when I was in college that I learned so much about what makes a story exciting and what gets the audience engaged. So I was a little disappointed to see in the book during Stephen King's writing advice where he'd say things like, turn off your TV, unplug your TV. If you want to get focused on writing, you need to read lots and lots and lots of books and don't give a shit about watching TV.
You're not reading a book.
And it didn't even really make sense in the context of the book that he would give advice to stop watching TV and movies, because in the beginning of the book, when Stephen King was first talking about how he first fell in love with wanting to create horror stories and monsters and things like that, he would talk about how he would go to the local movie theater and sit down and watch like pulp movies, sci-fi movies, monster movies, things like that. And that when he first tried selling his short stories to other kids at school, he would try to make enough money to be able to buy a movie ticket so he could go see another one. So it was movies and TV that inspired him in the first place and first got him interested in these stories. So what I'm not getting is, why can't I use that as inspiration too? It just felt a little bit like that standard, like, oh, TV's gonna distract you, cut it off. It seemed like advice that was more tailored to him because like maybe he gets distracted by TV or something, so he was telling us to not let us get distracted by that. But TV is just as good of a storytelling aid as books are. And that's not to say that you should do that in place of reading books. I think you need to do a little of everything. And I'm not the writing police. I'm not here to tell you what you have to do, but I'm going to tell you guys that in my experience, yes, I do think reading a lot of books is important for becoming a better writer, especially because what you're going to get in a book that you're not going to get in TV or movies is you're going to get a lot of the characters' internal dialogue, whether that's from the third person limited perspective or from the first person perspective. You're going to see in what ways that tends to flow and weave in with the action in the story, the dialogue in the story. Where do we stop and see descriptions of setting? Where do we stop and see descriptions of things that can only come from a narrator, that can't necessarily come from just seeing something on the screen? However, I think from studying movies and TV, we get a sense of the cadence of how dialogue works. We get a sense of how to incorporate action and describe action as opposed to spending too much time getting bogged down just with visual and sensory descriptions. My point is, I think both is good. I think we should have both. I think that if someone is only watching TV and movies and isn't reading any books, yeah, that's not going to help them as a writer, so you probably should say, hey, you know what, actually, maybe read some more books, because that is important to do. But at the same time, don't tell them to stop watching TV, because that can absolutely be a huge source of inspiration and a huge source of, honing your dialogue and action writing skills when you see something where those tend to be the focus. That's just my 2 cents on that. I do think that this book had a lot of really good pieces of advice, however, one of them being finding your ideal reader. That's one thing that I talk about on this channel when we talk about business and we talk about marketing things, is the idea of the target customer. At the end of the day, you are creating something because someone else is going to want it. So when you're writing a story, you have to keep in mind who is your ideal reader. And that means that not everyone is going to like your work, because there's no book that is universally loved out there. So not everyone is going to be your ideal reader. But if you can find someone whose reading tastes align with exactly with what you're going for, then their feedback is going to be super valuable to you. I thought it was cute that his ideal reader is his wife, because a lot of times we hear people say, oh, don't have your spouse read your work, they're going to be biased. But I can tell you guys from having a spouse myself, Tyler's one of my harshest critics. So when I make, especially when I make YouTube videos, I think if I can make a YouTube video that holds his attention, that means that I've done something really well, and I get really proud of that. And when I make videos or when I write books or when I put anything out there, if I give it it to him, he's going to give me a lot of feedback, including a lot of criticism. Now, my mom is someone that I go to just to be like, oh, you did a great job. I love that, because my mom is a universally encouraging person. So my mom is not my ideal reader in the sense that I don't think she's going to be critical when it comes to things. I think she just like universally gets excited about everything. But if you can find someone who is your ideal reader and is going to give you that type of feedback, then their feedback can be very valuable to you in the process of revision. Something I found very validating in this book is that Stephen King mentioned he only writes like 2 or 3 drafts of a book before going into the editing phase. And I was worried that I was writing wrong, because I do this too. I hear sometimes people being like, oh my god, I'm agonizing over this novel. I'm on my 12th rewrite of it from beginning to end. And I'm just like, girl, what? Are you serious? And again, if that process works for you, please do it. If that's something that you feel like makes your writing the best it can possibly be, and that's a fulfilling process for you, do it. The most important thing is that you find the process that works for you habitually so that you can get your writing done. However, I will say that sometimes I worry that like, because usually once I've gone through like one major revision and then one minor revision of a book, after that I'll pretty much give it to an editor and then be ready to publish. And I'm like, does this mean I'm not doing enough? Am I not revising enough? Obviously, everyone knows that your first draft is going to be shit. Like, that's part of the process. No one's going to get it right on exactly the first time, and if you put too much pressure on yourself to get it right the first time, you're never going to write anything, because you're going to sit there agonizing over the right order to get the words, when in reality, you should keep moving forward, and then you can go back and change things. But I don't see the need to have to change it a million times if that's not how your process works. I think the book I did that went through the most like full revisions was 90s Kids, and that one went through, I think, 4 drafts of like full rewrites and then went into editing. I went through 3 drafts of full rewrites myself, and then when I signed a contract with a publisher, my publisher did developmental editing on it, and I had to do another full rewrite based on the developmental edits. So that was the 4th rewrite, and then it went into editing. And that's the most revisions I've ever done on a full novel. Yeah, I would say I was just kind of validating to hear that not everyone does revise over and over and over again. Some people revise fewer times. And that's not to say that I'm not revising as much, like I might just do more of an overhaul in those revisions. One of the pieces of advice he gave was that a lot of the difference between a first draft and a revised draft is that you cut 10% of it out. And I think that really only works if you start off as an overwriter. Some people start off as an underwriter. Like, I tend to write less the first time through and then have to go back and fill in a bunch of visual descriptions and things like that. But I guess that really depends on the story itself. And for a lot of people, you might be tempted to just write too much and put in too many details that really don't matter to the story or aren't going to matter to the audience overall. In this book, he has this concept of writing with the door open versus writing with the door closed. And the idea is that you write your first draft with the door closed because it's just time to get the story down. It's time to think through everything and tell it to yourself the first time, versus writing with the door open is in the revision process when you need to be open to feedback and everything like that. And I thought that was kind of a good analogy. I should make sure my door is closed when I write my first drafts of things, but usually I leave it open because I'm like, what if Chewie wants to come in and hang out? And maybe he didn't mean that literally. Like, maybe he was talking about like a figurative door. I don't know. I also have never read Carrie, and this book talks a lot about Carrie, so now I think I need to read Carrie, because I'm just like, wow, this book actually, it sounds pretty good. I see why people like it. Anyway, I need to read Carrie. Overall, I definitely recommend On Writing. I've noticed that writing craft books tend to help me get motivated when I'm stuck in a rut or when I need to sit down and buckle down and actually do it. I kind of had a similar experience with The Artist's Way. I did a review of The Artist's Way on this channel, and I actually didn't really like that book just because of how much emphasis it put on God and manifestation and spirituality and the creator and like all of this stuff that is not really my thing. So I didn't really like that book as much, but I will say that The Artist's Way did get me into a good habit, which is that when we do the Your Morning Guru show every morning, we do a morning pages journaling section where we set a timer for 2 minutes and have us and everyone in the chat just write whatever's in our mind for 2 minutes just to be in the habit of daily journaling. And I think that that's been a very good habit for us to build. So I did get something out of that. And I found that this book I think I got even a lot more out of, because I think the writing advice was a lot more specific, and it was woven in with learning about someone else and someone else's process and how a successful person has done it, but without the era of you must replicate it the exact way that I do, because it wasn't necessarily saying, do things like I do because of this or whatever. It was more like, here's my best advice. Also, here's what I did. Here's the details on how that unfolded, and you can learn take what you need from that. And I thought that that was kind of a good approach to take with this type of book. So I do definitely recommend On Writing, even though there were a few things in the book that I disagreed with and a few things I wasn't a fan of. Overwhelmingly, I really did like this book. I'm going to be giving it 4 stars out of 5, and I would love to know what your guys' thoughts are on this book as well. If there are any other like writing craft type of books you would recommend that you guys want to see me read and review, please let me know in the comments below, because I am happy to do those as well. I'm working a lot on various writing projects and improving writing in a lot of ways, so I'm looking forward to learning more and more as we go along. I appreciate you guys being here with me for this video. I will see you again soon. In the meantime, keep on supporting small businesses and have a fantastic start to your day. Bye!
Get you some nuts.
There was lots of memes.
Makes me wonder if I should take up lesbianism.
Chicago. You guys asked for it.